All right, so we are here today with two organizations, the Odam Anti-Border Collective as well as Defend Odam Juid, which both of them are grassroots movements of tribal members and allies formed in opposition to the border wall along the so-called U.S.-Mexico border, which cuts through ancestral tribal lands and is desecrating sacred sites. So thank you all for joining us. Let's start with some introductions, and let's go to Nellie and Amber.
Hey, thanks for that, Nick. Anya Chugid, Nellie Joe David, Anya Margarita Venegas David, and Anya Hollister John David, Aho Amjad. And so I'm from Aho, Arizona. I'm Donawatam, Hiachidatam, and mixed ancestry, mixed European ancestry. I think that's it for my introduction.
Skikdash, Ani Abjugig, Amber Ortega, Ani Nyoja, Geneva 1, Ani Nyaog, Melvin Ortega Bup, Ani Mu Amjad, Sip Oitak. Hello, my name is Amber Ortega. My mother is Geneva 1, and my father is the late Melvin Ortega, and I come from the village of Coldfields, from the Babakiri district. We are the fourth village from the border on the Tohono Nation, and my father is from the Aho area, and I'm Tohono and for my mother's side, and for my father's side, I am Hiachiratam.
And also we have Napoleon and Amrah who are joining us as well.
Shopaichuig, Anian of Chugig, Napoleon Marrietta, Ania Vorakamaratam, Tanatam, and Pipash, Anian Statanik Amjad, Akamaratam, Chukshanjit, Havakiskigitam. Hello, everyone. My name is Napoleon. I guess I'm from Gila River Indian community, and I'm part of the anti-border collective, and also a grad student here at Arizona State University. And I grew up in the Gila River Indian Community in District 4, which is called Stotnik, and happy to be here.
I am Amrah Saloman from a community of Otham descendants from Yuma, Arizona. Yuma traditionally had Hyachid Otham villages, and then also there was a lot of Akmal and Tana folks who came there during the turn of the 19th century, 20th century, to work in the mines and in the plantations. And so our community is a community of descendants. We're not currently federally recognized. Many people are not currently enrolled. I grew up in Northern California, and I'm reconnecting with my community through participating in the Otham Anti-Border Collective. And I'm also of mixed ancestry, Mexican and European as well.
Great. So this is Melanie Yazzie. Just sitting here with Nick, hopping on the Red Nation podcast to talk to our Autumn relatives today about the really beautiful and powerful land and water defense you all have been doing in your community against ongoing settler encroachment and the violence of the border wall, Trump's border wall. And before we get into the arrests that happened last week, I wanted us to maybe talk a little bit about the recent history of both what Autumn Anti-Border Collective and then also Defend Autumn Juid have been doing, not just in relationship to this particular national monument, but some of the other actions you've been coordinating, some of the other campaigns. So if you could just give us a little bit of background on your organizations and what you've been up to, that would be great. Maybe we can start with Nellie and Amber.
Sure, absolutely. We've had the Autumn Anti-Border Collective for a couple of years now. It's been a group that focuses on removing colonial borders and barriers. I think Napoleon probably has like our mission, which is kind of a really good statement of who we are and what we're about. And so, we're from all areas of the Autumn Juid, from Acumel Autumn territory up north, river people, to Hyachid Autumn, to the west, towards Yuma area, Ajo area, all the way down to Puerto Peñasco and Caborca area, which also kind of intersects with Tono, because there's really no real boundaries or dividing lines between our people. It's just kind of like describing the area we're from. And Tono Ata means desert people. And so, that encompasses a large area of the Jowett, our ancestral territory and land. So we've been like a core group doing different things, trying to connect despite the borders and barriers between our people, and that's not just in the form of a wall, but it's also in the form of bombing ranges, cities, border towns, national parks, wildlife refuges, all of the colonial separations we're dealing with, and we want to work beyond those separations and barriers, because we've come to this realization that all of our issues, even though we're on various areas, we're all interconnected, and we want to reconnect. And so that's my kind of spiel on the Altamente Border Collective. And then the Defend Autumn Jewett, there are a lot of other kind of core organizers who aren't here, and I just want to send out some respect to that, to the organizers and others that have contributed. It's not really about the organizers, though. It's more of a campaign, and it is what it's saying: Defend Autumn Jewett. And so the core organizers is not like about us. It's about like actually doing direct action to protect our land, which through other entities really hasn't been possible. So it's more like a campaign on that, and everything's been moving really fast. So I think we're kind of figuring out things as we go along with that. But
So I came on this past year as as a as part of my journey to reconnect with my roots and understand the history of our people. And I was really grateful to join this group of people, because we are a collective group of Autumn who come from different areas, and we all have a different piece of the history, and we all have an understanding of the things that we heard in our stories. And we all have a similar message, because we come from the same people. We different bands of Autumn, but part of our work has been to raise awareness and to educate a lot of our youth, and even allies, just on the significance of our sacred sites, and also what's been done to our people, to the land, and also to just empower the people, and help them to understand that we can come together, and we were once together and united, beyond the barriers that now exist and beyond the borders, and we can still come together, removing those colonial mindsets. But, in order to do that, we need to unite in our voices, and just continue to educate and stand for the land. And with the Defend Autumn Druid, it was an effort to for direct action, and it's just a way to support the protectors of the land, the water in our communities.
And then
Yeah,
just
I
to
guess
follow that. Oh yeah, I was just going to ask you to follow up on that, Napoleon.
yeah. So I can read our statement, and this is OABC. Our statement. Though Autumn traditional territories occupied by borders, states, settlements, mines, dams, extractive invasive agriculture, bombing ranges, and freeways, we keep our roots intact by remaining connected with each other and our Druid, with the intention of breaking these barriers down. We believe in indigenous autonomy and liberation. Our liberation is inherent in our right to move freely. We oppose any colonial structures meant to harm us, disarm us, divide us, and destroy us. We acknowledge and respect our two-spirit, transgender, non-binary Autumn and relatives. We respect women and oppose settler colonial influence, patriarchy, and sexism within and outside of our communities. So, kind of just some brief history is that we're Autumn, which is connecting all of us from the north and the west, east, and south. And when we're separated by reservations and stuff, we're giving these government identities, and so we're like what Nellie was saying is like we have the Tohono O'odham Nation, and then we have the Akchin Indian community. We have the Salt River Pima Maricopa, and then we have the Gila River Indian community, and then we have the Hiachid district, or Hiachid Humachkam out there. So even though we are identified as these in our legal textbooks as these separate entities, we all are connecting. Well, for us, it's connecting through our struggles, which breaks down and doesn't recognize these separations of our people, right? So I think for me, like that's what getting involved with OABC and our relatives down south, I took it upon myself to just like be a part of the group and learn more, because like it was said in the statement, we've up here for the Akamaratam, we've been our side has been desecrated by freeway and colonial structures. So and that connects all the way down south of a bigger project. We could probably touch that later, but for me, that's kind of what I've been kind of engaged with in the group.
Yeah, what is that bigger project down south?
I don't want to speak over Napoleon, but the freeway thing intersects with the militarization and the border wall, and I don't know if that's what he was referring to. So they are widening the freeway on Akima Otham Jawed near the Phoenix area, and blasted and destroyed the sacred mountain. Part of that is due to Canamex and the Sun Corridor, which connects back to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and also prevention through deterrence, and all of these colonial structures that have gone together. And so basically, it's about trade and goods. And so they want to make the best possible roads from Canada um, down to Mexico to make to secure these trade routes. And that's also a big interest in the militarization of our lands, because they want to protect the goods that they're moving across. And so we're seeing a lot of infrastructure with transportation, widening of roads, which also destroys all kinds of sacred sites throughout the land. Did I get it right, Napoleon?
Shit, I'm so sorry. I actually was talking; it was on mute. But no, you you
The
jumped
first
in right
time
at
an
the great.
Indian man, the first time an Indian man has a microphone and he's on mute.
He selfies it.
For real, huh? First time I had the staff and the feather, huh? Like ready for my feather walk. Dude, yeah, no, I was, yeah, actually, it's the the Canamex corridor and how that from Canada transportation of goods and whatnot to going through that is yeah, like the huge bigger picture is basically for transportation and getting people to um their goods from one place to another internationally, and that taking that 10-minute route to cut a slice of um our sacred place and our what we do. And yeah, thank you, Nelly, for that. I'm just like,
So the next question I have is really about the land itself. And I think oftentimes we think of land defense or water defense as being in like a place like where I'm from, right, in South Dakota. And what's actually fascinating when Napoleon and Nellie, you were just talking, or Nellie Joe, you were just talking, I was thinking about how in some of the reservation communities the roads were really bad, but then all of a sudden when the pipeline started coming in, they started fixing the roads, not for the people who live there, but for the heavy haul trucks that were going to go through there. They actually fixed a bridge that was like in dire need of repair. And so it's always funny because it's like these projects aren't meant to actually benefit the people who live there. They're always for industry, even if it is like a minor development. But going back to this question of water and land defense, one thing that I found really fascinating is that at the site that you all ended up getting arrested at is a place where they're drawing from a spring. And as we know, as you know, I'm not a desert person, but a lot of you are, and people think of the desert as lacking life, right? But in fact, the desert is full of life. It's full of indigenous people. It's full of lifeways and things like that. And in many ways, the work that you all are doing is a form of land defense and water defense, because they were tapping into this aquifer to draw out water to mix the concrete to build this grotesque structure on your land that's dividing your people. It's literally using water to genocide you, right? And I was wondering if you all could maybe talk a little bit about what it means to be a water protector and a land defender in the so-called border communities. And I'll direct that to Amrah first. And
Sure. So part of I think the larger history of the place is that, kind of just what everybody was talking about, that there's the colonial way of traveling and extracting and moving goods across the place, and, to destroy indigenous communities and destroy the sacred and the environment in the path of that. And then there's, our own history, right? So actually, O'odham communities and O'odham Juvid was historically a very large kind of international indigenous trading center. We had trade routes that extended, um, prehistorically down to Nicaragua, out to California, all the way up to probably your territory up in the Dakotas. We had these relationships with people before and didn't need to destroy the entire environment in order to do that, right? And so that's part of like our take on, why we're anti-border, is it's not just about the colonial US-Mexico border, but the borders that are internally imposed upon us from, village or reservation to town, between different O'odham, amongst ourselves, So those are the borders that we're trying to undo that have been imposed on us. But the region is not historically as dry as it is now, so there's elders in all of our different areas of the Jovid who can still remember when there was a lot more springs, when there was a lot more water, when there were trees, and when we were able to do our traditional agriculture. And, our people, built these massive canal systems historically, but we've had, because, we were in the middle between the East Coast and California and got trampled over during the gold rush. That was the first wave of colonial occupation from the US that came through, even though we historically had already experienced Spanish colonialism. They were looking for, where they could set up their mission slave plantations and where they could extract minerals. And then the US came in through the gold rush, kind of trampling over O'odham in order to get to California. And so during that process, they first came in going after furs, going after the beavers that were in the canals and in the rivers. Then they came in going after our land and agriculture, taking that water and extracting it. So all of the rivers in our area have been dammed or they've been dried up, and so there's parts of our, the Gila River that don't even flow anymore over ground. And that went, and then, when the rivers dried up, then people had to survive by cutting wood. So the trees that the community members would live off of for sustenance, like mesquite, that provided a big amount of our diet historically, had to get cut down so people could just survive because their water was taken. And then in the desert, cattle ranching was introduced that destroyed a lot of the springs. So these springs that we have left, like Quito Baquito, are some of the last remaining areas of traditional water, in the region. And so that's what we're trying to protect, and that, O'odham have been historically trying to protect since colonizers arrived. And I don't know if folks want to, maybe Amber, want to talk more about what the site means to Hiacha?
Sure. So there's a strong history with this spring, with specifically Quito Paquito Spring. So like Amber mentioned, our sacred springs, even just a natural spring, was utilized for agriculture, and so the special thing with Quito Paquito is, it was home to specifically Hiacharatam, and there was, it's documented. There's a document that shares, what that time looked like, when there was a settlers passing and travelers, and it mentions, how there was an abundant field. There are a lot of Atham who can recall when Quito Paquito provided the people with fields of crops, traditional crops. And there is even a story of how there was a time where it was utilized for mining temporarily, and the people scattered. And then once that operation stopped, the people returned. And before, so the area where the farms were, I'm told, were where across from the border. So on this, what is now considered the Mexico side, or Sonoita. Um, so once that border that line was drawn, the people were prevented from utilizing the water to grow plants, and even the people on the other side. I just want to mention, like, we had we've had events, and we've brought people together from both sides. And at one time, we did a trade of water. We took traditionally we gathered water in pottery, and then we had women walk it over as an offering to our relatives on the other side, or what's considered the other side. And we did an exchange, and it was beautiful, but it was also heartbreaking, because before these borders, and barriers, we didn't have to do it in that way. It was, in a way where they could easily, come over you know, um, and be there with the water. And the water is healing. The water is, this water is specifically is, considered very sacred, because it has provided, life and help sustain life. And, the Hiacharatam, credit this area for their survival. And there's documents, back into the 1600s, of how people traveling the desert came upon it, and it was this beautiful oasis. And it's it's really heartbreaking, also because we know that the aquifer beneath is being taken, due to the drilling of for this wall construction. And through the time, we've seen, for ourselves, even just within this past year, the water declining, and at record lows. And right now, the spring is, the Park Service, they're doing what they can to maintain a leak. So this leak is happening due to the drilling and the heavy, the sounds of the construction. And it's also home to endangered species, the endangered Sonoita mud turtle and the Sonoita pupfish. And there's plants and animals very significant to that area, as well as a burial site nearby. And it was home there was documents of when there were mud hut homes from Hiacharatam. So it holds a lot of it holds a very special place to us, because it holds our history, and it helped keep life. And it's also known as a bird's nest, home to various hawks and owls and eagles. And we've noticed how they haven't been as present, and that's been hard to see too.
Yeah. All of you have my mind spinning with all this history, because there's so much, with the desert. That there's that misconception that it's barren and all this stuff, and there's all these ideas of what a desert is. But like the Sonoran Desert is beautifully diverse, and there's so much wildlife, and there's so many, hashan, the saguaro cactus, and different species of cacti, and all of this life, and like Amrah said, my grandmother remembers a time when everything was lush, and there was pomegranate trees and all this,
Fig trees.
fig trees, and this
Watermelon.
in living memory. There's a whole different landscape that existed in these areas. And going back to the area of Quito Springs, and like thinking about water. So water, itself is very sacred to all of our people. The Acumel Autumn, or there was no separations, but from Acumel Autumn territory, traditionally, there were salt pilgrimages taken down from up north all the way to the Gulf of and so on that journey, which is now occupied by the Bear Goldwater bombing range, which
Wow.
tests their bombs and missiles, and also even has like a fake mosque in their area
Wow.
Oh, wow.
to
Wow.
practice terrorizing folks abroad.
Hmm.
So they're now doing that on the large area where our sacred journey was encompassing, and those areas, such as we know them as Crater Range. Our Ajo community has so many stories about hauntings and all these like bad accidents that happen in that area. And as a young person, I never really gave that a lot of thought until I started learning about the history, and then I was like, oh, well, duh, like um duh, it's haunted. And then also, it's also in the prevention through deterrence corridor. And so it's also an area where the uh, No More Deaths folks and Samaritans are cut off from, and they're not able to leave water. Um, and there's also a lot of, water is so much life in the desert. And that's the reason they have the prevention through the torrents, is because they know that in the harsh areas of the desert where there isn't water access, that means life or death, and that's for people, that's for animals, that's for plants, that's for everything. And so, it's the US and all occupying entities are using the fact that water is life to desecrate us and divide us. And as you said with Quito Springs, it's they're tapping into all these underground aquifers in order to mix the concrete and also just like smooth out the roads and pave way for all this destruction, in addition to just kind of clearing out so much of these sacred plants and animal lives. And like Amber was talking about the animals, pronghorn, Sonoran pronghorn are endangered. They mate in they cross border mate, and so a lot of scientists have said, like, if you put up this border wall, which they've already mostly done, um, that they will no longer be able to mate and will likely become extinct, which is really terrible. It's scary, and it's awful what's already been done. We've already seen sacred sites such as Monument Hill just blasted, in this show of might, and it's just been a long year of desecration for us, like at
Hmm.
a record speed, which
Yeah.
throughout this whole year, it doesn't seem like it's gotten much attention at all until, and especially with COVID happening, the wall workers established man camps in my hometown of Ajo, Arizona. And that's also the place where they established their Border Patrol housing. And in Y, they have this huge Border Patrol facility. And so, God, my mind's going all over the place. So with COVID, the wall workers were actually the ones who were documented as the first with COVID in our town, because they were kind of
Hmm.
going back and
Hmm.
forth. And then there was this huge outbreak, which happened just very recently in like end of June, July. And so in the beginning of that outbreak amongst the wall workers, they had to pull back for just a moment of time. It felt like this blessing, not a blessing because COVID's awful, but it felt like we kind of had a little bit of time to stop it. But we were also getting hit. Our families were starting to get it, and everyone, just all around us. And we're also, starting to experience a lot of people we know who are passing, and everybody's just, been wrapped up in these personal issues. And it was like before we could even realize it, the wall workers increased at this turbo speed, while we were dealing with all of these with this outbreaks personally.
Hmm.
And we were also working on educating the community and reaching out to the community, because one of the things that people don't understand. Okay, so we have the Tohono Nation, and there is, this colonial mindset to where they believe that because the nation is established as a nation and has its own constitution, that that's the only area that applies to tribal land. That's only tribal lands that matter. And we're trying to reach out to the surrounding communities to remind them, and even educate them a little, like because there are a lot of youth that don't understand that beyond the reservation is still O'odham land. And
Mm-hmm.
Right.
even with Hiachiratham, Hiachiratham are the sand O'odham, and they're not a federally recognized tribe. We do not have a district to represent our people. And for 50 years after the Tohono Nation's constitution was established, so it took 50 years of the Hiachiratham requesting and fighting for acknowledgement under the nation's umbrella. And even then, it's like this erasure. There's been an erasure happening. And even for myself, it took some years for me to understand through my father that I was Hiachiratham. And because I didn't grow up being taught that. I grew up believing that I was full Tahanawatham. And but that was like far from the truth. The truth was, our people are beyond the United States border. We have people, on both sides, and beyond the Hanawak Nation, our people exist. And trying to educate youth about that, it's been taking some time, because there's it's such a big story, like Nellie shared, that it's huge, the Aho area, surrounding areas of Aho. And so that's part of, that's been part of our goal too, is to include youth in these efforts more, by helping them
Mm-hmm.
to, like, know the truth of who they are and where they come from, and what they've been closed off to.
Yeah, definitely empowering the them that were kind of cut off, even in census in the beginning. Like our family from the Ajo area or all the way down to Caborca, we had to like nobody was included as them past the reservation boundary. And so we fortunately got enrolled in the Tono O'odham Nation because we had relatives who were within the reservation district. And so, we had to go through that whole process of having them vouch for us that we were O'odham. But there was a lot of other O'odham, in all of these places. There used to be villages pretty much all throughout the area, but those were all decimated in the past 100 years. And and as Amrah has shared, all the way towards Yuma, she has a lot of stories about how towards that side, a lot of them were just not recognized at all.
Hmm. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through, just to describe the place from an O'odham perspective, what it means to O'odham people. Because it's when Indigenous people use the term sacred site, that word sacred is so inadequate, I think, for kind of describing what it means historically, culturally, and socially to us. And, I think it was back in February, wasn't it? You were talking about how accelerated the destruction, particularly of the site that, is O'odham land, but then became the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. But I believe it was back in February, the Army and the Border Patrol invited press for a portion of the monument being blown up. Was that what happened? And right as I believe it was the chairman of the Tohono O'odham Nation was actually in DC, testifying against the desecration of the sacred site there by the border wall. And so, of course, this is just part of like, I guess, Trump's general belligerence because he's known for that. But I was also thinking, I'm thinking back a few years to the Bears Ears struggle, right, where different indigenous nations, including my nation, the Navajo Nation, came together in a coalition to try to establish a national monument and to co-manage an area outside of quote unquote reservation boundaries. In the same way that the national monument falls outside of quote unquote like reservation boundaries, right, for O'odham people, and trying to use that as a mechanism to protect that sacred site. And of course, once Trump was elected, one of the very first things he did in January 2017 was he just opened it up for resource extraction. Primarily, I think it was for fracking, right, and exploratory drilling, et cetera. And so I'm just thinking about there aren't necessarily parallels between the struggle for Bears Ears, and what you all have been doing down, particularly at this sacred site for your people. But what do you have any thoughts about the significance of the struggle to protect this sacred site for the larger movement that Indigenous people are engaged in all over the world, actually, but definitely in North America to protect sacred sites?
I think there are some parallels with perhaps one of the things I was thinking about when folks were mobilizing to support Standing Rock was that a lot of the argument was that the reservation is not the limits of our traditional homeland, right? And folks
Yeah.
were
Hmm.
asserting earlier treaty rights. And in our context, like the treaty issue is a little bit more complicated, and Nellie could probably talk more about that. But that's really what we're fighting for is that our traditional historic O'odham Juvid is still all of our land as O'odham and O'odham descendants. And we all deserve to be able to, have the means to protect it. And that's really the relevance, I think, for other folks to, connect to other struggles is that um, we have to get out of the colonial barriers of the reservation. Reservations were often started as prisoner of war camps. They were forms of incarceration where people were limited to a smaller territory than what they traditionally had spiritual connection to. And so, what we're trying to do is to restore that spiritual and sacred autonomous connection to the larger original territory that we had relationship with and that we still have relationship with. We're seeking to uphold that relationship to the sacred and honor it.
Yeah, I agree, and kind of just I think through the white gaze or the through the settler gaze, we see like folks going into our territories and thinking it's just like barren. When I there's like historical comments about how deserted the desert is, or how barren, like, and how nice these natives are, right? So they take advantage of that. So for us up here in the Akamaratham, settlers would just come through and think, these are just very nice people helping us to get to go do some more extraction and whatever it is,
Mm.
pretty much, and let them on their way. And one of the things that happened was that with us, it's like what was mentioned earlier, was that our river, the Gila River, was dammed by the Coolidge Dam. So that caused a lot of starvation for our own people, and that caused a lot of deaths and a lot of knowledge, traditional knowledge. And I think, Melanie, you're right. This word sacred has to really be defined. And what I think about sacred is that that's a very set, like, it's a way of, like, I guess in English, because I think in our languages we have something much deeper than what the English language defines as sacred. And I think that plays out in a lot of legal terms, and I think that the pipeline is a great example to fight for that. And also, when we were fighting against the 202 freeway, one of the things that we did put in there, and one of our things that we're kind of getting fought against, was like, well, what do you mean by sacred? Like,
Mm.
is that like what does sacred mean? And so, like, to the settler, like, language, it's not, like, you have to go out there, you have to, like, really do a lot of things to understand what that means. And like, our struggle is like, no, man, like, there's so much more to that meaning, that it's hard to fight in these legal these colonial what is it, their courts, because that's just a lack of knowledge of what that means to the place and the land and the water and everything else like that. And so when we really like want to define these things, and when we have to like watch our relatives be dug up and our
Mm.
relatives like the animals just be removed, it's like
Mhm.
all of our well-being gets impacted, and what we're seeing with the land is like pretty much cutting off a vein of our livelihood. And that's the only simplest way we can try to
Mhm.
get sellers to understand what it means in these complex ways that we do things. And it's just a lot to really entail when we talk about the language of sacred, and bringing people together, and the parallels and the connections that we have. Because whenever when the whole Standing Rock thing was happening, there is a support of, once we start saying like um phrases or words in our language and understanding from elders and people who know the land, and we connect with that much deeper than just saying, "Oh, this is a sacred site, come fight for it,"
Mm.
um
Yeah.
so when we
Well,
start saying it in a deeper language, and but
mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think what the um what your all struggle is making me realize. I'm also teaching an indigenous environmental justice class at UNM. I'm in the Native American Studies department this semester, so we've been thinking a lot about these different struggles historically. Like a national monument, right, is like the settler version of a protected is protected land, right? Like it should be a small tract of land set aside from the encroachment of settler development and capitalism. And so settlers don't even protect their own sacred sites in a certain way, and then they don't at all have any respect, right, for indigenous sacred sites. So if they're not even like, how like settlers have broken every treaty they've also ever enacted, even that's the supreme law of their own constitution. And so if like settlers aren't even willing to protect things according to their own criteria, and then they really aren't willing to do that for indigenous people because they really don't give a shit, right, about what indigenous people think or how we feel, then like what are you left with? And I think the emphasis that your grassroots groups have on direct action, I think, is a really important clapback to that, and trying to think and then doing education in your communities, especially working with youth. But I think that we're seeing land based struggles happening in a different way. And so the Kumeyaay, right, are engaged in a struggle, a land based struggle against the border wall right now, further down, further west in so called California. And they actually just issued, was it today or maybe I'm not on Instagram a lot, but an open call called Camp Land Back, and they're actually inviting people to come out there. And so I'm hoping that with this podcast and with kind of the coming together of these different land-based projects to stop the border wall, that there will be more attention to this. Because I've also been a bit shocked at, I think Nellie Joe, you said this, at the lack of attention or the lack of press that has been given to what's been happening in O'odham lands, particularly around the destruction of this national monument.
Yeah, the what's really stuck out to me too, and we the last time Nellie and I talked on this podcast, we talked a lot about this, but I think it's worth emphasizing again that this landscape, is a form of power. Like it's where, from what I'm understanding when you're all talking, is like it's where you draw your governance from, because
Mm.
it's not just some kind of abstract thing. Everything that you were describing is like, you're talking about economies, you're talking about livelihoods of people, and people don't see that. They don't understand that land defense and water protection is like a form of labor. And when you're out on the picket line, I'm sure a lot of those construction crews who are out there are also union workers, and they're crossing a picket line every single day that they go
Mm-hmm.
to work, because you're saying that this is destroying our livelihood. This is our job to protect this, right? And I was just thinking about this in the sense of like the larger conversation that's happening in the national media around, like, somebody like Steve Bannon, who was just recently brought up on charges, arrested, um, rather humorously, but also, he was raising money for the We Build the Wall campaign, which is basically raising a GoFundMe account to genocide your people.
Mm.
and it was like it was kind of like, it was entertaining to see him get brought up on charges and everything and have to go through court and get humiliated, but also it was like nobody really stopped and asked, like, well, what was the, like, where was the wall actually being built and what was actually being done. And then the other thing, the other piece of news that came out, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is this is what makes headlines, but then the work that you all do is not like, breaking national media, it's not getting the same kind of framework, but it's all connected, right? Is the ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, under the Department of Homeland Security, was recently, it's alleged that they were forcefully sterilizing migrant women in their detention facilities, and that's like horrific, right? But we know that this is a longer history of, federal or state forced sterilization of indigenous women. I'm sure that many of these women are indigenous and who were just merely enacting their right as indigenous people and as human beings to freely migrate, um, and their punishment is to be forcefully sterilized. Their other punishment is to have their children taken away from them. Those two acts alone are definitions of genocide.
Yeah.
Right.
United Nations definitions of genocide.
Like the base definitions. But what's not talked about is that it's connected to this larger border infrastructure that is also committing, ecocide and genocide on non-human relations. And it really does, it breaks my heart. Like I was telling Melanie before we even got on this podcast, I was like, man, it's going to get really heavy, and like try not to go to that dark place. But I think it's worth talking about, the arrests that happened last week and what you all were actually doing. And I was wondering if Amber and Nellie could talk about that, because the arrest itself was, it was ridiculous. It was like misdemeanor charges. You should have at least, not that like they have any authority really, because they're just a colonial government anyways.
They're the National Park Police.
Yeah, watch out. uh, uh, but but what, walk us through that day and like what happened to you, because I remember I saw the arrest happen and I was like, oh shit. So I started texting people, and it was like days, like they were like, we don't know what happened, like we don't know where they went. And so we were all worried, like we were, we put a call out, and then I think it was Monday that we finally got word that you all were safe and sound. But can you walk us through that day, what happened, the arrest, and then also the processing procedure and the charges that were filed?
Okay. I just want to give like a little backstory. So this past year before COVID hit, we were, doing we were doing what we could to raise awareness for people to, to come out and see. We held different events, and we just wanted people to see, like, look, this is the story. This is where our people are from. And so we were we were doing that on our own parts, and we were just so it became like a, just a I'm sorry, like I get really emotional about it. It became part of our daily lives, our monthly lives, like, going out to the spring and then being there. And there's a strong energy there. There's our ancestors, and we kept feeling this urgency. We were, asking for support, and we were going out, and the wall construction picked up. COVID hit, and we were we took a trip out there to check on things, and it was just a way of like healing too, for ourselves. And we went out and offered songs and prayers, and we went on our own, separate ways to check on the spring. And that day, it was after Labor Day. They had a 4-day weekend, and we knew that they were going to reach the spring soon. We just didn't know what time, so we were doing what we could to check for the timing of everything. And that day we were there, they happened to be starting the starting to dig the trenches. And
This was
so
Labor Day weekend.
this was
After Labor Day.
after Labor
Oh, okay.
Day weekend. This was that Wednesday.
Yeah, so they were off Monday and Tuesday, and we didn't know that they were off, but we kind of got word of that, and so, and we'd been calling for mobilization, but it was really difficult because we didn't know their schedule, we didn't know when they would actually be, because they're working on all these areas of the wall, and they do it on different days, and it's just really like, we don't have that intel. And so we were just there that day to check on everything and monitor. And we did not plan what happened, but as Amber is saying, we were praying, and then both of us heard the dee 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 and the heavy sounds of the machinery, and so we were both in separate spots, kind of, checking on the spring. There's a lot of like dog poo because tourists have been just not respecting the area. There's all just stuff that we were like, like looking around, and then also just like praying for protection and things. And so we both heard that, and it was like we didn't plan it, but we both looked at each other like, it's time. We have to stop it, and we both just ran.
Yeah, there really wasn't time to really think about it. It was just no, like no, this cannot happen. And I had my shotgun. We both had our phones, and we did.
We were by ourselves, by the way. I was like, there's nobody out there, and so we were just freaking out too, because like we ran in front of the first. I don't know if it's a bulldozer. It was a smaller.
They call it the crawler. It digs the trenches.
Yeah, so we ran in front of the crawler, and immediately after we ran out in front of the crawler, so that guy, right away, he stopped, and he
was trying to he did different maneuvers, trying to dig in different places, and so we kept stopping him at each place, and he did a 360 and tried to dig on one side, and so Nellie ran on that side, and I stayed on the other. And then they send a bulldozer over with an angry worker.
Yeah, so that guy, he called his backup. He didn't know what to do, but the other guy, the angry guy, came like super machismo, just like swung his bulldozer around like really close to where we were at, like just real like, and you could just see the anger on his face. And then he just like took his big bucket bulldozer and was ready to just like dig. and so both Amber and I are together in front of that, what was it called,
the
crawler, and Amber goes, look at that guy, and it was like he was fighting us with his bulldozer. That's what it felt like. And I just ran in front of that one, and he had to stop because he wasn't about to.
Nellie ran across and sat in the bucket, and I was capturing everything on camera, and I was worried about her. I tried to run on that side too, and as soon as I left the area near the crawler, he started to attempt to dig, and so we just stayed on opposite ends of the road,
waiting, just praying and hoping that like
yelling
for help. Yeah. Like this, like we knew they called for backup. We were still by ourselves for at least like an hour, and we knew that others were like coming, possibly, but we just didn't know when or what. And thank goodness, media crew arrived when they did, because I think if they wouldn't have showed up, nobody would have even known that we were arrested or taken.
Well, that's the thing. So I had it's the cell phone service is a little difficult out there, but I had a little bit of a signal, and so I was able to make a couple of phone calls, and I was informing as many people as I possibly could, like, hey, like, Nellie and I are out here, like, this is what's happening, this is, can you get here, please hurry, because there was an increased presence of border patrol and construction workers, and there was the national park service, and so there was this congregation happening up the road, and they did stop, and they didn't know what to do. That was the funny thing, was they had no idea what to do with us, because we we stood our ground and we were yelling at them. And yeah.
It was so interesting when the media showed up because there was all these border patrol lined up, and I think they were getting ready to arrest us at that point. But when the media showed up or the cameras were there, all of a sudden the border patrol vehicles just take off like real quick. Like they knew that they had to do better. And ironically, back to what Melanie was talking about with the Park Service and their colonial like protection. Um, you know, they had to call in the Park Service to arrest us, I think, because they were the ones cross deputized. So it was like border patrols that were like border patrol ended up big gaggle of them ended up like lifting me out of the excavator, and then they had to get the Park Service to arrest us and transport us. And I want to talk about this a little bit more, but like it's so interesting because like the history back in the day with Hyachid, the Park Service kicked our people off the land, and supposedly in the name of protecting the environment. And yet the Park Service is now enabling and supporting these wall workers and through the forms of their officers who serve in the capacity to arrest them and that are protecting the land and the water.
Thus continuing a long tradition of national parks just being purely colonial, and participating thoroughly in indigenous dispossession and genocide. I was on a podcast on Wednesday talking about the colonial history of national parks, so it's fresh on my mind. Were they very militarized, those national park cops?
Yes, I think so. So I should say, like, so the entities, like, how do I phrase this? They are militarized. There are folks among Kiacha that I think need to establish good relationships with the Park Service because they need that, like, we need federal recognition and, like, all that is necessary. But, like, I think a lot of that pressure gets us away from telling the real stories of how the Park Service has abused Hiachinotam. And then also they've been terrible with prevention to deterrence and all the deaths that happen on National Park Service land. I've been to a few of the No More Deaths meetings, and we'll hear things like the Park Service, and this was a couple of years ago, we'd hear about how the Park Service didn't like No More Deaths out there providing water because it, scared off the visitors and it was unsightly and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the, there was I just want to quickly mention one thing. So the Park Service, they mentioned they were they were short-staffed, and one of the reasons we were going out there so often, we picked up, the visitations we were having because we found one visit we came upon 2 dead hawks, and we were really upset, and we called, and they said that oh yeah, we heard about that, and it had been days before us being out there. The sun was hot, and one hawk was in the water, and so we called our elders, and we asked how to go about handling these animals, and that like set us off, like, no, they're not doing, they're not here caring for the land. Like we knew it from the beginning that just based off of our trips, like Nellie said, there's been dog poop and like just trash left around, and they've we've had to go around and clean up the area. And one of the things, so they did call Border Patrol, and those men were definitely armed. They had their guns, and that's when we increased our yelling because it was extremely disrespectful, especially taking that in our area. Showing up in that way. We know with us being 2 women, and being unarmed. We weren't threatening anyone. We were defending our land. We were asking them to leave, and they were informing them of how disrespectful and violent their approach was, in showing up in a way where they were not, there was no permission given. There was also no cultural monitors. There was no they didn't consult with any Hiachiratam, and that's also part of the history is like the National Park Service cutting a check for $13,000 to the last resident at Quito Paquito Springs.
Yeah, so they illegally confiscated the land, which is a common story, y'all know. So like it's just like they'll say that they bought the land, but it's really like they cut a check to somebody that didn't even live there yet.
Sure.
And then claim that they bought it from the family, but the family's like pissed,
So once you were arrested, what happened?
So that was, I thought, so we could feel them ganging up, or I could, they were coming in on me. I closed my eyes, felt them lift me out. I was cooperative once, they took me out of the bucket. And so they handcuffed me and put me in the vehicle. And I thought that Amber was free. I thought that she got away because it seemed like that.
Right. They said I could leave, but they wouldn't give me room to leave whatsoever. And they asked if I was denying. If so, they were threatening, and and so I had to, say like, no, you're not allowed here. You need to leave. You need to take your weapons. You need to take this away from here. You're not allowed here. And so I kept, repeating that. And I was doing my best to just like stay put, because I knew in my heart that that's once we left, they were going to to dig the trenches. And it just I was capturing as much as I could on my camera. And so they say that that was my refusal to leave. And I was also standing there singing songs, just keeping strong in that moment. And I guess they saw that as a disrespect or me ignoring them, but it was, just that's a sacred place.
Yeah.
And and so I was also recording everything. I was doing several things at the same time, just trying to like show them like, no, like you have no power over me, like.
Yeah. Yeah. So then they took us to, they handcuffed me real tight. I don't know about you. But I mean, that was tight. And so they took us to Lukeville, where we got patted down. We got patted down there, right? And then Lukeville patted, it was like pat down every single place we went. And then so we took us to Lukeville, which is the port of entry. And they fingerprinted us there and took our names and everything. We keep hearing that like we wouldn't give up our names and all that stuff, but we did.
They took my wallet, they took my cell phone, they took my rattle, they took my necklace, they took every form of ID I had of it. And they've actually the lawyers are on it right now, but I haven't received any of my belongings back. And my lawyer told me that that they've been known to destroy things. And it was I'm still dealing with that, because it was my shauka, my rattle, my necklace, my beaded necklace, and all these gifts have been through ceremony. My handkerchief, my and the even the evidence of what they were doing, like face front. And I'm still waiting to hear back.
Yeah, so they kept that, and we hear. So they took everything from Lukeville. We heard we were going to go to the Ajo jail, which is about 45 minutes away. So Lukeville is about 45 minutes away from Quito Boquito Springs, and then another 45 minutes away is Ajo. And so we thought we were going there, but they kept going and going. And so we're just like, where are we going? And we ended up being taken to Florence with the Core Civic, the Corrections Corporation of America. And so we were there all morning, or we were at the spring in the morning, got arrested. It took till like maybe like 3:30, 3:40 till we got to the Core Civic. And there we were taken in. We didn't get processed for like a really long time after we were in there. They were very overcrowded.
They didn't have any. They didn't have our charges. They had no paperwork on us, and they moved us from cell to cell. It did feel like as if they didn't know what to do with us. So we kept, asking, how long will we be here? Can we talk to a lawyer? And from the moment before we were arrested, we were requesting to speak to a lawyer. And so we would make several attempts to request a call, a lawyer, and just as just we wanted to know our charges. We were told, and the
they were making us feel like we were in there for a long haul. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't know what was happening, and then by the time we were processed, sometime during the evening, they were giving us like all the big old pack of underwear and like making it seem like we were going to be there for a
the
long stay. And
Wow.
and so we're freaking out like, oh my gosh, how long are we going to be here? And then all the while too, like we're pretty exhausted. We were out in the heat, and then those facilities are really cold. And they shackled us as they were shackling everybody, chains around our waist and our hands and feet. And it wasn't until, well, we thought when we were being processed, they're like, oh yeah, we got beds for you. And at that point, we were so exhausted. We were just so happy to hear that we could sleep, and I couldn't wait. But after that, they put us in another cell, a nice bigger cell, because we were putting like little tiny ones for a long time. And that's where we were supposed to get our pregnancy test. And another woman came in and got her test, and she was taken out like right away back to the facilities, or back to the wings where the prisons are. And we thought we were going to get taken back right away.
Yeah, we had to call out a couple of times because it was cold, and Nellie was exhausted. We were both in our cuffs, and
hours passed by, and we thought like we were gonna go back, but it was just like, okay. And then like all of the voices, because it was so crowded, and then we didn't hear anybody. It was just like, okay, everybody's gone in the processing place, and did they forget about us?
It was really uncomfortable, especially seeing like the conditions of what these cells look like. The floors, the everything about it. There was no soap available. There was no hand sanitizer available. There were no blankets. There was nothing that they would give us. They wouldn't uncuff us, and so we sat in that area for a while, just like calling out, like, "Hey, hello, hello."
Like not trying to get in trouble, because Amber got in trouble during processing. Like,
they said I posed a threat to security because they asked if I used my left or right, and I made a joke, and I said neither. I'm arrested. And
That's good.
That is good.
I'm gonna use that one next time.
Next time we get arrested.
And he's like, "You just earned yourself restricted living." It was, yeah, it was
an ordeal. Yeah, so we didn't really get to talk to a lawyer until the next day. I mean, it was like, I'm pretty sure it was like the wee hours of the morning where we finally got to sleep. Because we first had to like get strip searched again and all that stuff.
the delousing.
Delicing. We had stinky stuff in our hair. Go back to our room, let it sit and absorb with all that stinkiness. And they're like, "Oh yeah, go back to your room, have that absorb, and then I'll wake you up so we can take a shower." And it's like, we were so exhausted, and she was taken to the other facility, and I was just, like, I can't go to sleep and be waking up. Like, it's just, I won't. It's just past the point of exhaustion. So I just stayed awake and, went through the process, and it felt like we got to like probably blink, and then they were like, breakfast. Um,
Wow.
Yeah, we had asked for phone calls even while being there. They said that they didn't have a phone that would reach into the cell, or a cordless phone to put into the cell. It, it it was really, we then they had, and that was another thing they kept bringing up, was they didn't have our charges. They still had no paperwork, and
yeah, they said that's why we were handcuffed or chained the way we were, because they didn't know like what kind of threat we posed.
so we ended up finding out that our charges were petty charges, and that usually, like, we were told by different both our lawyers, that we shouldn't be there, that we were supposed to be cited and released, and that there was that we just shouldn't have been there to begin with. And so right now we do have those two misdemeanors of 6 months time for each and a fine of $25,000.
Yeah, up to 6 months. And so yeah, we still haven't gotten like a hearing date or anything like that, and we're kind of told that this is going to be a long extended process. So this is all new, and we're gearing up for it. So
Well, thanks for sharing all of that, because I think it is really important, for folks to know that that this happened, and that I think what we're interested in knowing is like what's next in the struggle, because this isn't going to just go away. I think people are thinking like that, like even if Trump gets voted out, that somehow these projects are just going to cease. And I don't like, just based on like Obama's record, if Obama's record is any indication of what Biden is going to be like when he enters the presidency, and I'm not going to like soapbox, but I will. Uh, but like everyone is like, there's this kind of like debate going on right now, like, oh, we got to vote for the lesser of two evils and this and that. And I'm like, okay, Biden was the second most powerful person on the planet, allegedly, right? He's the vice president, ostensibly, and he had the power to at least weigh in on the Dakota Access Pipeline, but never said anything. It still has said nothing, to that effect. I think that he is a dead, not, I shouldn't say that. He's he's a dead end. We'll say it that way. But there has to be a long-term, kind of struggle. And what I've seen from what y'all are doing, that this isn't just like a one-off thing about the border wall. Y'all are like you're putting into practice what has now become, popularized by the phrase land back. And so what does that mean? Like, what does that struggle look like for all of you? And I'll turn it over to Amrah and Napoleon first.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Sorry, I'm unfortunately going to have a toddler playing in the background. But I before we get to that question of like what does land back look like, I just wanted to touch on two kind of earlier points that you had brought up, Nick, before. Was that the labor issues around this, right? So border violence is a form of extraction through separation and control. And so what they've done with our people is force us historically into this situation where we have to survive by being complicit in our own genocide. Nellie and I have had long conversations about, our family members and ancestors who worked in the mines, and like our families identifying as like miner families. And that's really, it's like so sad to think about, okay, that, because of the massive, damming of rivers, deforestation, occupation of all of these different colonial regimes, that then O'odham people had to survive that way by desecrating our own land. And that was the only option people had to feed their families, right? And so what they do is, for us, like decolonization, part of like the question of what does land back look like, it's not just like land back, but it's also giving us the ability to regenerate our lives and our connection to land and life, so that we're not surviving this colonial violence by being forced to choose between land and life, between the individual and the communal, between the material and the sacred. And that's what's happening, how our people are kind of internally colonized, by having to participate in these kind of jobs, right? And so the labor question always feels like complicated to me, but I also always want to like push against it, because it gets reduced to like, oh, we need jobs, and what you're doing is taking away jobs and taking away people's livelihoods. And it's like, no, actually, like, we should never be in the situation where a job or a livelihood is dependent upon genocide or dependent upon desecrating the land. Like that in and of itself is a form of violence, right? And then the jobs that like, that these industries bring in are often temporary. Like what I always found like, troubling by how people were talking about pipeline jobs is that pipelines are actually a form of automation to get rid of truckers and trains, And so I was always like, why are unions supporting automation? Why are unions supporting getting rid of, more long-term transit jobs in favor of the short-term automation jobs of building a pipeline? And similar things, like why are our communities And then you see this in different areas where communities that are really depressed economically will advocate for like, okay, we'll accept this prison because it's going to bring jobs, and it's like, really? That's not the kind of job, like the job that, requires you to leave your dignity at the door isn't the kind of job that we should be asking for. So I just wanted to bring that up about the labor issues. And then, one of the things that really struck me, trying to, support Nellie and Amber through all of this was we were really horrified that they were taken to a for-profit migrant prison. But we were not surprised because there's this long history of colonial incarceration and control of racialized bodies at the border. And this is sort of the intersection between our indigenous struggle and migrant struggles and Black struggles, I think, is that, settler colonialism, Spanish colonialism, which, is a little different, they all kind of transfigure each other's technologies of genocide and control of racialized bodies. So you have this kind of genealogy that our people have suffered through of like the missions, the mines, the plantations, military bases, border patrol. And then that led towards, Japanese internment on O'odham lands. Now there's these for-profit migrant prisons on O'odham lands. And then there's also the deportation of O'odham from the reservation. There's a lot of elders and monolingual O'odham speakers who have been deported illegally from the U.S. side of the reservation to Mexico because they didn't speak English or they just didn't have the right ID on them, and so we're seen as criminals because we're in this area that the border is occupying. And that's kind of what happened to Nellie and Amber, that they were, put into this for-profit prison, and criminalized the same way that migrants crossing our territory are criminalized. And that was so horrifying to us. We were really afraid for them that they were going to be exposed to COVID. We were really sorry, there's an angry toddler in the background. But we were really afraid for their lives, and we were like, this is exactly what it means, that we're, in order to protect our land, we have to put our lives on the line, quite literally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd just like pose that question to Napoleon too. Land back, what does it look like?
What?
Well, I think just what that's it's so huge. Just like our lands, our traditional lands, right? It's not a mindset of this is it and this is where our land stops. And I think that when our conversations of land back, it's where our lands are at today, and then I guess in a puffier sense is reclaiming or restoring and um re-emerging from where we've come from. And so with a lot of the things that we've seen in the media, there's bits and pieces, but I think the overall picture and what we see as the state right now is exactly what happened to Nellie and Amber. That there's this long injustice of first it goes on the ground, the violence against obviously indigenous women, and it's connected, and Autumn women, and the discrimination, and then it goes into like this whole process of not being heard and um basically in an internment camp, and um seeing the disgust and everything else when you're internally like oppressed and being physically oppressed in these things that has happened. And then in the whole story, like Amber and Nellie, like none of it um is is safe, like none, like just when I first saw the videos and everything, I had no idea who what was going on. I'm like, what the heck? And then it's Nellie and Amber, and I just it's surreal because this violence is like it just started like I had so many things that I was like, my God, like what's going on? And internally, like, because we're all like one people, and it just impacts you so much. And um, with the whole land back stuff, it is just, I think it's just what we've seen. I like right now, like even me, like I'm still trying to process a lot of it. And um it's really like the state right now is really hard, because hearing like Nellie and Amber's, like the different videos and everything else in our conversations, we're still trying to figure that out ourselves. But this is just a small area of a bigger picture, locally, internationally. And I think with land with that is doing what we can in our spaces, and help and educating our people before, like what Amber was saying, before we were out doing things, and really educating our people of this situation. And I think um it has become to that point where right now direct action is what we're seeing, and was is like what is when people have been asking before, right? Like, land back is direct action. Okay, so here's what we can do in our capacity, in our space as Autumn, for direct action. And we've seen it. And um it's about digging deeper into that direct action. What happened? What do we do now? And so those crucial questions of those types of things is what's coming to light in these small groups like ours, Defend Autumn Juvad, the Red Nation. Like we work on a really tight, small scale. And then once we have that, like, see, this is what it is like to feel, in these prisons, like in these places. Like, this is what it is. This is the raw, like, this is what you should be feeling upset about. And um and helping, and for our future generations, because it's just like this whole bigger picture of us. And um that's just a small of it. I'm still trying to develop it as well. Like many of you, some of you are, we're in institutions. And I think there's work to be done in every single space that we are, as indigenous folks, and as like Autumn. And hopefully, and I know it will be continuous, that we continue to see these injustices. And this is for the long haul. So 30, 40 years, what is this um place, what is this Quito Paquito Springs, what is it going to look like? What is our roles and our meanings when we are no longer here? um
Mm.
and so I think that's just, we got to be in it for the long haul. And 30, 40 years is like so scary, but it's so close, right? It's just like, by the time, like like you, Nick, and you, and you and Nellie were just not talking about this not so long ago. And then when we came up
Right.
to Albuquerque and presented, it was not too long ago. And then, like, how
Yeah.
fast these colonial projects have been going on, and just like, you know what I mean? So I think like land back entails a lot of what we're willing to do in the long haul to answer that question, because we're just a very small portion of what it looks like.
Mm. Yeah, and I'll pose that question to both Nellie and Amber as well, but also in your answers, is there a way you can tell us how we can get involved?
Yes. So with I think Amber and I are kind of a little bit of uncomfortable with a lot of the. I don't want to speak for her. Speak for myself. All these things are horrendous, and what we've been experiencing. But and they bring attention to so many things that are happening to the land and to other people, other folks that have experienced these things and haven't gotten so much attention. So as far as like saving Quito Baquito and the ongoing struggle to do that, we defend Autumn Jewett, which we were part of. um, you know um, I think a lot of our core organizers have been really doing a lot of things. Like, for example, 2 weeks ago, Defend Out the Majawid held an action in front of Stinger to block the wall panels from coming down, which is a good strategy, but it's also like they already have this whole area where they have these panels stored, and so that action is effective in getting more, but it's also like they might have enough panels already down there, and so there's we need to have strategy down there. And immediately after our arrest, there were actions at Quito Baquito Springs, and other land defenders and water protectors went out there and also held off border construction for another time period. And because of just the way that we were incarcerated, there's a lot of fear, in putting folks' bodies out there. A lot of our people have already been targeted by these institutions, and it's just this further scarring that we're having to figure out. And then also, like, kind of even relating to like Standing Rock issues, like a lot of our community is afraid of having folks from the outside come in and kind of like take over the narrative. And so we're very cognizant of that, and we really want to, as the Ottoman Border Collective, as the campaign to defend Otham Jawed, we want to do things where there are direct actions, but also ensure that these actions are led by Otham and not by outside forces who may have agendas they want to co-opt. And so, for direct actions in our area, encourage everyone to follow Defend Otham Jawed for call outs. There will be call outs. And also OABC. So follow us in that capacity, and make sure, that, the contacts are made, so these actions, at least on the Jewid, don't kind of spiral out, and as we've seen in other movements. And then also in another capacity, a lot of these companies that are building the wall are all over the United States. For example, in New Mexico, there is Southwest Valley Construction. They're out of Albuquerque, and they're sending their workers over here and establishing their man camps. And so if there are other places where, like where folks like the Red Nation maybe can we would encourage y'all to do direct actions in your territories where these companies are headquartered. So there's the Southwest Valley Construction. There's also Fisher. Fisher has several entities, construction entities. Stinger Bridge and Iron, which has facilities near Coolidge, which is right by where we were imprisoned. And then also Fisher goes up, like they're headquartered, I believe, in South Dakota. And they have places all over the place. And so there's Fisher Industries, Southwest Valley Construction. There's also Elbit. Elbit is international. It's a company out of an Israeli tech company, and there's actions, being held by folks in UK that are targeting Elbit Systems plants, and that is helpful, for folks that come from European entities to stop those entities from expanding and profiting where they're at in their headquarters. So there's all these other areas and places where direct actions can be made that aren't led by us, because it's in other territories, other indigenous territories throughout the United States and then all over the world. And so we call for support in that way, in doing direct actions towards those companies that are doing this, and also just keeping an ear out for our calls for direct action with Defend Otham Jawed, and all the other campaigns that we're simultaneously, we want to also start a anti-bombing range campaign, things like that. So So those are some starting places, and I'll give it up to Amber.
Just exactly what Nellie shared, and also just do your research. Look into these companies, look into the history, to then even go to an elder and inquire with them. What it is they know. Because that's part of like our goal is to we're educating ourselves, but we're also seeking out information from our elders. How do we move forward, how do we honor the land, and honor our ancestors, and how do we do these in a way where we're empowering ourselves too, and our people. There is a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a and just part of the land back. So one of the things that we've been wanting to do as a group, is to be able to purchase an area on our land, because it's all we don't, as Hiacharatam, have land. And there is one of our tribal members, Lorraine Eiler. She utilized, and I don't know if that's okay to mention her name, but I just do want to pay her some respects, because she did utilize part of her own money to purchase a ceremony, or a burial ground, um, in Darby Wells area, outside of Aho, right directly outside of Aho. So there's the Aho mine, and right behind the tailings is the traditional village, Darby Wells. And there was a time where they had plans to relocate the bones, and she went ahead and bought that area. And so right now, that's the only area that is owned by any Hiachid. And so we do want to at some point be able to bring our elders back, and show them, like, look, like, in a way, bringing our people home.
Yeah.
And we are known as people without a home.
Yeah, there's a lot of areas. There's other areas that families do have access to. Certain families, but there's a large population of O'odham that don't have access to these areas. And as you can imagine, with colonial violence, how that can create a lot of lateral violence. And I think with Yachirotam, we've definitely felt that. And amongst those who are fighting for the land, because there hasn't been recognition of that land, it's just like fighting for crumbs, and then that in turn makes people fight against each other. And so just kind of going to that, like we there's lots of hiacha that we want to support. We used to have a district, like um, like Amber mentioned, but as part of the Tono O'odham Nation, but it's no longer. It was dismantled by our own people, and that is very hurtful as well. So as far as just back to her point, like it would be amazing for allies who, because we have a lot of snowbirds in Aho. And snowbirds are folks that come from the Northern Territories, and they have homes up there, and they also have homes down here where they, can be in the winter and then return back in the summertime to the cooler temperatures. And it would be nice to be able to have like some of those spaces, to just be, especially in an area where it's so heavily militarized, that we don't have safe spaces to just exist or even pray or even have ceremonies. And so it's really important for our people to have access to those places.
Thank you all so much for sharing. This has been wonderful, and I'll post the links to some of the things that you mentioned in the show notes. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to explain this to us and to our listeners. There's a lot more to be done, I'm sure. I mean, sadly, um, well, it's a good thing, because then you'll come back on my show. But this is going to be a long-term struggle. But these are things that we all need to take serious, especially where we're coming from in places like Albuquerque, or even up in South Dakota, or wherever the kind of border industrial complex, may find its feet in occupied Turtle Island. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.